lesson today has the title that is a little bit comical. It is What Has 10 Heads and 10 Horns? So in a way that's a joke, but it also is more serious. That is really the primary question about this thing that has 10 heads and 10 horns that is described in both Daniel and the book of Revelation. And so the focus of this video is going to be to look at all of the things that are said there, put them together, and understand what's being discussed and described. So beasts generally, Daniel and the book of Revelation are both very similar in their style of prophecies. And that's something that's kind of characteristic of different prophets. They have different styles to their prophecies. And that's noticeable, for example, comparing Isaiah with Ezekiel and others like that. They each have kind of a style of their prophecy. And Daniel and Revelation are really quite similar for being one Old Testament and one in the New Testament. And one of the things that they are similar in is that they use beasts, which are combinations of known animals usually, but sometimes not. But these beasts are ways to describe the characteristics of organizations or governments. And so the beast is kind of a collective thing, and it is described by various characteristics that are given to you about those beasts. And as I said, sometimes these beasts are a combination of wild animals, and so the characteristic of that animal is being set as the characteristic of this organization. And so you often see multiple animals with different characteristics being applied to a particular organization. You see that a lot in Daniel and also in Revelation. It's a common thing for both of them. But sometimes they aren't a combination of animals. Sometimes they're just beasts that don't have any description more than that. Maybe you'll say a beast with 2 horns, but that's all you hear about what its characteristics are. But they have one particular beast in common to them, and that is the one that we're going to be looking at here. And this beast Daniel describes its genesis, its beginning, and its evolution, or at least part of its evolution. And then Revelation picks up from there and tells us a bit more how it evolves forward, and also more about how it's going to come to an end. And it's important here that we look at this because this one is talking about a world government that will come in the future. We don't know when in the future, but we know it's going to come in the future. That's very clear from both those prophecies. And so this world government, being a world government, is going to affect us as Christians and as individuals if we're around. And we need to know about it. We need to know whatever we can to identify it. And we also need to know not to go along with it. So we'll start with Daniel's vision of this beast. And in this chapter, Daniel has started by describing 3 other world governments as beasts. And so 3 different beasts with different characteristics have been described. And this one is the 4th one. And so those 3 are governments that have gone away already. They came, they went, they're done with. And now what's being described in this vision that Daniel is seeing is a 4th and the last, which is the last one. So Daniel says, this is Daniel 7 through 8. Behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrifying and extremely strong, and it had large iron teeth. It devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder of governments with its feet. And it was different from all the beasts that were before it. It had 10 horns. While I was contemplating the horns, behold, another horn, a little one, came up among them. And 3 of the first horns were pulled out by the roots before it. And behold, this horn possessed eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth uttering great boasts. Now, that's not all that Daniel says about that. Daniel is going to say a little bit more about that. We'll look at that later. And then Daniel is going to talk to an angel in the vision, and the angel is going to explain a lot more about what all of this means. And he's going to be the one who gives us some critical information in addition to what's given here. And part of what the angel gives is a description of what those symbols mean. That's how we know what the heads and the horns mean, because the angel goes ahead and describes that to Daniel for him to understand. Doesn't do Daniel any good, though, for this beast, because it's still in our future, long past his. So the symbols that you need to understand are, when it talks about heads, it's talking about a jurisdiction within the government, or a sub-government, or a sub-jurisdiction, some kind of a division of the government. And so with this beast that has 10 heads, these are 10 divisions within the government. And so you would expect that they would be geographic divisions, because those kind of make sense. And you would also expect that there would be kind of a government level institution there that would be ruling over that division. And so that's what a head is. It's a geographic government area within the totality of the government. So horns are another thing you need to understand. Horns are persons or people. They are a representation of a person. And in this case, it's going to be persons who have some control or are going to have some control. And we'll see how that works in just a moment. Now, horns on a head would mean somebody something a little different. It would mean a person who rules that over that jurisdiction. So if the horn is on a head, the person would be the ruler of that jurisdiction. And crowns you're going to see appear here. It's going to come in Revelation. It won't be in Daniel. But later on, we're going to see crowns. And what a crown represents is an authority to rule. Having a crown means you're a king and you get to do what you want to do. And that's what it really means. And you're going to see eyes mentioned in two different ways, both in Daniel and Revelation, and in other places too. Ezekiel does the same thing. Many eyes, something that has many eyes on it, like more than two eyes on it, which would be normal for a person, is something that has a deeper understanding. So it's like a seer or a prophet who has some deeper understanding of things. But when you see the phrase, which you're going to be seeing here right away, is eyes like a man. That means this person has just the ordinary understanding of a man. He is not a prophet. And we'll see where that comes up, and it's being used to make a point, and we'll talk about that when we get there. So those six symbols are important to understand what's being said here. And if you want, you can go back now and look at those verses, but we're going to go ahead and explain some of this. So summarizing what we saw there about Daniel's beast, this is going to be a government, it says, that is different from any before. It's going to be a unique world government, and nothing like it has been seen. All the world governments before had a single leader, one king, and that's not going to be the case here. It's going to have these 10 horns, these 10 people who are running this government, and so that's different all by itself. And it's also going to be different from some others that we've seen in our world that are organizations sort of like that, because it actually conquers other parts of the world, but it works like a committee. And so that's kind of what makes it strange. It is a conquering world power, but it works like a committee of 10 people. And Daniel's vision shows him and says to him that this beast is going to rule the whole world. And we need to understand that carefully because the Bible says that many times, is that there's going to be a government that rules the whole world. But none of them ever ruled the whole world because it was just out of their reach. For example, the world governments that were in Babylon and Assyria, Rome, none of those ruled anything in North America, and there were people in North America at that time. So what it means when it says rules the whole world is it means it rules all of that matters of the whole world. Pretty much everything that matters in the whole world is being ruled. So when it says that this beast is going to rule the whole world, that doesn't literally mean every scrap of it, because some scraps are inconsequential and just not worth the effort. So keep that in mind. So now next, we saw that there were 10 horns, and we know that that means there are 10 people, 10 leaders. And we saw that this beast has 10 heads, which are the 10 geographic kingdoms. And yet they share this same body, showing that they are all linked together. And so there is an organization together that these horns are part of. And in fact, initially, these 10 horns are that body. They are that beast as it's being called here. But it's going to morph a little over time, and we'll come to that. So what we're seeing described here is a little bit similar to the UN or the EU, but not really. The UN is a group of all of the kingdoms in the world, but they certainly aren't broken down into 10 leaders. And the UN has no strength. It has no ability to tell anybody to do anything. Everything is done by agreement through resolutions and things like that. So the UN has no strength of its own, and that's very different from this kingdom that we're talking about here. This is a kingdom that goes out and conquers, and the UN doesn't have an army of its own. The UN would only have an army if some nation gave them their army to use. So, and now it's also a little different from the EU, which is different from the UN. The EU actually has some strength. It can actually rule a little bit over the kingdoms that are part of it. And so it sets rules and tells people how to do things. And it has, especially financially, it has quite a bit of control. But in other ways, it doesn't. So it has some strength. So it's a little bit simpler. similar, but it really doesn't have military strength. It doesn't have those kind of powers, which would make it different from this one that we're talking about here with Daniel. And and the EU is also something that no, I don't think anyone would call a success story. No one would use this as a model. No one says, "Ooh, the EU government, what a wonderful government that is. I just want to have that," because it really has been oppressive and highly bureaucratic and has all sorts of issues like that. So no one would ever say that that's a model. So we shouldn't think that it would be like the EU, but the EU is a little bit similar. So, as I said before, the beast evolves over time, and we see that even in Daniel. We'll see more of that again in Revelation. And so it talks about those 10 heads and 10 horns, and then Daniel says there was this little horn, a single little horn. And now this little horn doesn't have any sort of head associated with it, it's just a horn. So it's just a person. Comes up among these other horns. And later on, a verse will say that he appeared larger in appearance than the other horns. And so he was doing something to make himself look bigger, even though he was a little horn. We don't know what that is. So three of the first horns will be pulled out by the roots before it. So pulled out by the roots, in this case, we actually learn because the angel later on is going to say that it means that these three kings, these three horns, were subdued. And so nothing was left of their kingship. It doesn't mean that they're dead or gone. It just means that they have given in, would be the way to say it. And the one that they've given into is the one that it says is before it. And so that's the little horn. So by what before it means is by the power of the little horn, they were caused to be subdued and give in to the little horn. So the little horn essentially takes over three of those horns that are part of the 10 and becomes the control of them and tells them what to do. So they're now not independent, they're ruled by the little horn. And Daniel also says some characteristic descriptions of this horn, this little horn. And it says it has eyes like the eyes of a man. Okay, so what it's saying there, as I mentioned before, eyes of a man means just ordinary two eyes like a man has. And so that would be saying, well, he's not a prophet. But why would you say that? Well, you'd only say that if this person is claiming to be a prophet. And so what I believe is indicated here is that this person will claim to be a prophet, but he isn't a prophet. He's just claiming that. Later on, we will, well, not in this study, but later on in Revelation and Daniel 2, I believe, it talks about a horn that has eyes all over it. And that would be a person who really does have insight like a prophet. Another thing that Daniel says about this is it has a mouth uttering great boasts. And you're going to see this over and over. You'll see it in Daniel, you'll see it in Revelation. And God has a real problem with this big mouth and the things that he claims. And really, in the end, he claims to be God or greater than God, in fact. He admits that there is a God, but he says, I'm greater than him. And so this big mouth is making all kinds of boasts. And we'll see some of those mentioned in the verses specifically. And God really has a problem with this person, and because of his arrogant attitude towards God. And as I said, this evolution that we're seeing here continues on. In Revelation, we see a beast that is, once again, just a little bit different in its description. And we also see some more about its characteristics at that time. So another thing that we see from Daniel, and this is all coming from Daniel chapter 7, the beast hates Judaism and Christianity, but only Judaism is going to be mentioned in Daniel because Christianity wasn't known at that time, and God wasn't really telling anybody anything about what the coming changes were going to be. And so all that is ever described here is the beast who is really against Judaism. And in our time, we also know that he will be against Christianity as well. So from Daniel 7:21, Daniel says in this vision, I kept looking, and that little horn was waging war with the saints and overpowering them. So this beast is definitely going to put an attack on Judaism and Christianity. That's a big part of what his goal is here. And we see that in Revelation, especially, lots of mentions of that there. And again, we'll see it here in Daniel 7:24-25. And that says, the little horn will be different from the previous ones and will subdue three kings. Now, there are a couple mentions like this about this little horn is different from ordinary people. And Daniel will make other references that we won't look at today, Revelation as well. And so he's different in some way from ordinary people. Um, but he's going to subdue three of those kings, and that's the three horns that we saw mentioned before. And it says he will speak out against the Most High. That's the bold boasting that we see coming from him, and wear down the saints of the highest one. And he will intend to make alterations in times and in law, and they will be given into his hand. They being the people of God will be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. Now, I won't explain how it is. I'll just tell you the time, times, and half a time means 3.5 years, 42 months. And we're going to see that 42-month reference again later on in the verses. Now, it's kind of interesting here. It says he will intend to change set times, and the reference here, or the context here, is the people of the Most High, and wearing down the saints of the highest one. And so he's apparently going to make changes in Judaism law. It says changing the times, and so the only thing in the law there about times is the observances. So that would you would expect that would mean that he's trying to move around things like Passover and other observances like that, maybe even the Sabbath, and trying to move things around like that. And it says he'll change the law, and we don't know exactly how, but that's something that you can use as a definition point. You can say this guy is doing that, and so this would be him because he's making or trying to make those changes. Now it does say he will intend to. It doesn't say if he's going to succeed at doing this. There's no real indication of that. And honestly, he doesn't have a lot of time. 3.5 years is a very short time to try and make those sort of changes. Nonetheless, he is trying to do that at that time. So we've looked at what Daniel said about the beast and broke that down into pieces. We're next going to look at Revelation's description of the beast, which is we're going to see all sorts of commonality between it. They definitely duplicate, and so you know for sure that it's talking about the same beast. And here's what it says from Revelation chapter 13. It says, "And I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast ascending from the sea, which had 10 horns and 7 heads, and upon its horns 10 diadems, 10 crowns, and upon its heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard, and its feet like those of a wolf, and its mouth like that of lions. And the dragon gave its throne, its power, and great authority to it. And one of its heads was as if it had been crushed to death, and its mortal wound was healed. And all earth marveled after the beast. And they worshiped the dragon that gives authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, Who is like this beast, and who is able to war with it?" A couple of important things here. Satan the dragon is behind this organization in a big way. He gives it the power and authority to do things that we people on the earth have never seen done before. And these are alluded to here, but we see in Revelation more specific references to what those kind of things would do. But they're going to do things like Elijah did, calling down fire from heaven, and things like that will be within the realm of this beast to do. And that's why people are saying, who is like this beast and who is able to war with it? Well, you can't war with something that can call down fire on your country. And so that's their point here is that this beast is going to show powers that like we've never seen. And again, we see here what I mentioned before is this beast is being characterized by comparing it with animals. And so it says this beast was like a leopard. And so what you need to do to understand that is you have to say, what does a leopard mean to people? What does it, when, if you said that person was like a leopard, what would you be saying? Well, you probably aren't talking about its spots. You're probably talking about its speed. That would make more sense because of all the cats, the leopard is one of the fastest and strongest. So its speed and strength are quite likely what we're talking about here. And it says its feet like those of a wolf. Now, what does that mean? We aren't really that familiar with wolves, but I think wolves are characterized as being very silent moving. And so I think that would make sense that it's talking about that. And we've seen in other prophecies the mouth like lions, and lion is that's deadliness, that's danger, killing is what that's really about. So those characteristics are of the beast are being described through the use of these animals. So and and um, and then people will worship this based on what they see this beast doing, this organization and its leaders doing. So continue on with Revelation's version of this beast. It says, "And a mouth that speaks great things and blasphemy." Now there's that boasting again that we saw before, and as I said, that comes up in lots of places. This speaks great things and blasphemy was given to it, to the beast. And authority was given to it to work 42 months. Now that's that time limit. That's a 3.5 year time period. And after that, it's done for it. And it opened its mouth to blaspheme before God, to blaspheme the name and the dwelling of those who dwell in heaven. And it was granted to make war with the holy ones and to conquer them. And it was given authority over all generations, peoples, languages, and nations. So you see a lot of commonality right away here. You see that this beast is going to do exactly what Daniel said. He's going to be attacking the holy ones, God's people, and in some part or some degree will prevail over them and conquer them. And it's going to have authority over all of the people on the earth, all that certainly matter. And we saw that big mouth mentioned also here, blaspheming before God, blaspheming the name of God, and blaspheming heaven. So this person is vulgar to God and is despised by God. And again, we see in Revelation 13, verse 8 here, that idea that everybody will worship it, except a certain group. And it says, and all the inhabitants of earth will worship it, those who are not written in the book of life of the Lamb, slain before the foundation of the world. And that's part of the purpose of Revelation here, is to give us an understanding of what to look for when this beast comes. And so we will know not to worship it, not to be involved in any of these things, not to fall for that trickery. And God's intent here is that we would understand enough of this from the descriptions that he's giving us to say, no, that's the beast. I won't do anything that it says. I won't go along with it. And continuing on with Revelation's version of the beast, this is now from chapter 17. We started in 13, but 17 also talks about it, and it gets referred to later on in Revelation as well. So in Revelation 17, there's a couple of verses, and they say, and the 10 horns of the beast are 10 kings, whose kingdoms they have not yet received, but take authority as kings for 1 hour with the beast. These will have one will, and their power and authority they give to the beast. So remember with Daniel, we never saw crowns mentioned. We never saw that sign of authority and the ability to rule like a king. And that's what's changing here. This is one of the changes that we see in Revelation here, is that it was originally a ruling committee. The beast was, and so it ruled as a committee, and each individual wasn't a king who had a domain that he could rule over. It was a committee over all of the earth. But it says they're going to be, that's going to change. They're going to be given a kingdom to rule, and that's where the crown signifies they now have the authority to rule over something individually, and each one has their own crown. And so, but nonetheless, everything they do is done according to the beast. And it says they have one will. They're all completely united in what they're doing, and their power and authority is given to the beast, and he tells them what to do, and they do what he tells them to do. Now it says 1 hour here, and 1 hour is mentioned many times, especially in Revelation. And it doesn't mean a literal hour, it means a short time. And in this case, from God's perspective, 42 months is a short time, because we'll see another verse that says 42 months is the length of time that this particular version of the beast is going to be in power. So differences that we see between Revelation's beast and Daniel's beast, there's just a few of them that are significant. In Revelation, it says there are 7 heads on this beast, not 10. Daniel had said that it was 10. So what happened here? And we don't really know. We can take a good guess, I think. What also happens at this last 42 months is the nuclear war of the 6th trumpet, and it destroys 1/3 of the population of the earth. And that would have to be China and India if you look at an earlier study we did on the 6th trumpet. And so those are nuclear wastelands, let's say, and really not habitable, or not easily habitable. And maybe that's the case here. Maybe that's why maybe 2 or 3 of the heads, those geographic kingdoms, were in that India China area and are now uninhabitable. And so that's why the Revelation is saying 7 heads and not 10 heads. That's some guesswork. I don't really know if that's the case. There's nothing here that really tells us why it only mentions 7 right now. In addition to that, it also says that one head of these 7 looked like it had suffered a mortal wound but was healed. And so that should mean that either the geographic area itself was struck by some disaster, or that the organization that is over that geographic area was destroyed or injured in such a way that it looked like it would not be able to recover from it. And so that's what's meant there. It's not talking about just a wound on an animal. It's talking about something more spiritual than that. So that's another thing that is a sign that's given to us here in Revelation. Um, Now we see, as I mentioned before, that the horns now have crowns. They now have authority. So each one of these 10 horns, 10 people, now has authority over a geographic area and is now the ruler of that geographic area. And this is the last permutation that we're going to see for this beast, the last change in it. What those verses were saying is this, it'll last in this state more or less. Who knows? It might change a bit. Um, for 42 months, 3.5 years. And at that time, Jesus comes back and puts an end to the beast. As Daniel described, the beast is killed. Um, Animal attributes, men, I mentioned. The leopard probably means built for speed, strength, something like that. The feet of a wolf means that it's stealthy, I believe. Lion's mouth is, in other prophecies, very commonly a symbol of killing, because that's what a lion does with his mouth. So we've compared what Daniel said with what Revelation said about this beast. We found a lot of commonality about what the beast does and its organizational structure, how things like that are. So there's a lot of commonality. There's also more commonality in the way they end. Daniel describes how that beast ends. Revelation also describes how that beast comes to an end. And we see that those match up as well. So from Daniel, now back at Daniel 7, then I kept looking because of the sound of the boastful words which the horn was speaking. There's those boastful words again. And I kept looking until the beast was slain, and its body was destroyed and given to the burning fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but an extension of life was granted to them for an appointed period of time. I won't go into that last verse. Maybe shouldn't have even included it. But the point really here is that Daniel says that organization, that beast, is going to be killed and thrown in fire. And we're going to see Revelation say the same thing, but in a different way, a little different way. Okay, and then Daniel summarizes what happens. So once that beast is, in the previous verse, killed and thrown in the lake of fire, or river of fire, I think is how it's described in Daniel. Revelation says lake of fire. This verse comes up and it says, Then the sovereignty, the dominion, and the greatness of all the kingdoms under the whole heaven will be given to the people of the saints of the highest one. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all the dominions will serve and obey him. What's that saying is when Jesus comes, and when he does, he slaughters that beast and gets rid of it, and now puts everything under the world under the control of his people who serve and obey him. So that's going to be the very final and permanent the way that the world will be under government. It will be under Jesus for the head of the government, and his people will be over all of the kingdoms of the earth. Now, Revelation says much the same thing, but a little bit differently. It says, And I saw the beast and its armies, and the kings of earth, and their soldiers who gathered to make war with him who sat upon the horse, that's Jesus, and with his soldiers. And the beast was captured, and the false prophet with it, who did signs before it, by which he seduced those who received the mark of the beast. Now, Daniel never mentioned a mark of the beast. That's only a New Testament reference and those who worshipped its image. And both went down, that's both the beast and the false prophet, went down and were cast into the lake of fire that burns also with brimstone. So we see the same thing happening here. When Jesus returns with his soldiers, which would be with his angels, he destroys the beast, it says captures here, and then thrown into the lake of fire. And that's how the ending comes for the beast there. But it's essentially the same idea. The beast is destroyed when Jesus comes, thrown into fire, and done away with. Now, the false prophet is something that's new in Revelation. It's also another one of those things that is associated with Christianity and so isn't really mentioned in the Old Testament, but we do see it mentioned. But I'm not going to go into it here because that's a different thing. Okay, so the evolution of the beast. I just want to summarize this and then we're done. We saw it evolve. We saw it start with 10 heads and 10 horns. And these horns are not on the heads. It's important to understand that. The Bible never says that. It's easy to say, well, if there's 10 heads and there's 10 horns, and you could think, well, the horns must be on the heads. But the Bible doesn't say that, and that actually is in contradiction to other things that we see. And so what we see is that this is a beast in the sense of it's a government, it's an organization, it's led by 10 people. That's the 10 horns. And this organization is committee driven, as we mentioned before. It builds itself by trampling the world and conquering all of the world by that. It doesn't It isn't like the UN where everybody decided to be involved in the UN. It actually goes out and conquers the world, at least parts of it. Maybe some of the parts decide to give in because they see there's no hope. But it definitely does conquer parts of the world and tramples the world, as Daniel had said. Um, and it organized the world into 10 geographic regions, and that's the 10 heads that we saw referenced, and sets up governments over those. And so that there's a lot of interesting questions about how that would work, but we won't go there either. So, but in the next evolution of the beast, we see that it has the 10 heads still, but now it talks about 7 horns, and you can even say, well, sometimes 7, sometimes 10. And that seems to be related to what Daniel said, is that this little horn would rip out. Now, in Hebrew, the word that is translated into rips out into the verse that we saw, the Hebrew word is used to mean subdues or humbles. So these 3 horns, 3 people that were part of that 10 people committee, 3 of them are subdued and give up their authority to the little horn, the head of the beast later on. And so when you do a little bit of quick math here, you say, well, if there were 10 horns and you take away 3 horns, that's 7, but still that leaves out the little horn. He should have been in there somewhere. But it looks very much like the little horn becomes the leader of the beast at this time. So he becomes kind of the head of the organization, and the 10 horns, or 7, depending on how you count them, are now under his control to some degree. So he's kind of the leader of the 10 now. So that's an evolution there. And so both those came from Daniel. Now from Revelation, we see things just a little bit different. There it says there are 7 heads and 10 horns, and the horns have crowns on them. So we saw that one head was healed of what had seemed like a mortal wound. So one of those geographic regions or its government suffered a nasty loss, and it looked like it would never recover from it. But people were shocked when the beast made it possible for them to recover from that, whatever it was. And we saw with those crowns, these horns now have authority to rule, and they will rule some geographic area within those 7 heads. And we see also specifically mentioned that they will rule for the last 42 months before Jesus returns. So that's how the beast evolves over time.